When you're as thoroughly anti-Semitic as Joe Biden, a half century worth, you know how to play your base. That is, liberal Jews, among others. You know how to say the right things and do certain things that gives the patina, the appearance that you're pro-Israel. And by saying it, I'm pro-Israel, I have their back, Israel's safe as long as I'm here. But this war with Hamas would be over. Most of the remaining hostages will be alive and returned. This war has been prolonged not by Netanyahu, but by Biden and Blinken. How many of you know about Hamas? I don't mean what they've done recently, but how many of you know about Hamas? Isn't it amazing all this horror that's taken place? We talk about Hamas, how little is actually told about Hamas by the corrupt media, or really anybody else for that matter. Well, we thought we'd take 5 or 6 minutes in a fantastic Israeli Defense Forces clip video and give you at least a thumbnail sketch. What is Hamas? Go.
Hamas, the terrorist organization that rules Gaza. How did it all begin? Let's go back to 1987. The first Intifada breaks out against Israel, and from within the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza, a new, more violent branch is born. Hamas, an acronym for the Islamic Resistance Movement. Hamas published its charter calling for killing the Jews, with jihad as its path, refusing peaceful solutions on principle, and swearing to invade Israel and be killed for the sake of Allah. Hamas's first official terrorist attack happened in early 1989, when Hamas kidnapped and killed 2 IDF soldiers, and soon after called for a jihad against the Zionist enemy everywhere. Throughout the 90s, Hamas carried out suicide bombings all over Israel and landed itself on the U.S. State Department's list of designated foreign terrorist organizations. In 2000, the second Intifada began even more violently than the first, and Hamas terrorized Israelis with more suicide bombings, car rammings, kidnappings, and firing rockets into Israel for the first time.
الشعب الفلسطيني بالتأكيد لا يمكن أن يستسلم أمام ذلك.
Hamas also executed Gazans thought to be collaborating with Israel. This 5-year reign of terror left over 1,000 Israelis dead, and as the second Intifada came to an end, Israel tried land for peace. In September 2005, Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza, and the IDF removed over 9,000 Israelis from their homes throughout the Gaza Strip. This is where Hamas's story really gets started. In January 2006, the Palestinian Legislative Council held elections between Hamas, Fatah, and other smaller parties. Hamas won the majority of the seats, and Ismail Haniyeh became the leader of Gaza. Shortly after, Hamas infiltrated Israel through a cross-border tunnel and kidnapped IDF soldier Gilad Shalit while killing 2 others. Meanwhile, the Hamas and Fatah unity government was unraveling with a 1.5 years of bloody internal clashes. The violence culminated in June 2007 when Hamas infamously threw Fatah members off rooftops and carried out a complete military takeover of Gaza. Since June 15, 2007, Hamas has controlled every aspect of government and life in Gaza, and there have been no elections since. Hamas quickly ran Gaza into the ground, maintaining armed resistance against Israel as its top priority while neglecting the basic needs of the Gazans they were now completely responsible for. Hamas raised taxes on Gaza's businesses, imposed fees on smuggled goods, received about $100 million annually from Iran, and diverted billions of dollars of international aid, all to finance building rockets, drones, and a 500-kilometer-long web of underground tunnels to hide and operate in. The Hamas leadership became billionaires as the majority of Gazans struggled in poverty. Under Hamas's oppressive rule, children are taught in school to want to kill Jews and are indoctrinated and trained in Hamas summer camps. Women in Gaza suffer from high rates of domestic violence, and LGBTQ+ people outed in Gaza are routinely imprisoned, tortured, and murdered. Since its foundation, Hamas has stored its weapons in homes, mosques, schools, and hospitals, infamously using Gazan civilians as human shields for their terrorism to this day. In 2011, Hamas released Gilad Shalit after 5 years in captivity in a deal that released 1,027 convicted terrorists from Israel. Yahya Sinwar, known as the Butcher of Khan Yunis, returned to Gaza and eventually became Hamas's new official leader. In the summer of 2014, Hamas members kidnapped and murdered 3 Israeli teen boys, launching a nearly 2-month-long war. During Israel's Operation Protective Edge, Hamas fired 4,500 rockets at Israel. The IDF destroyed 32 Hamas tunnels, and Hamas violated several official ceasefires before the end of the war. In 2018, Hamas launched the Great March of Return and incited weekly riots at the security fence between Gaza and Israel in attempts to breach it and invade Israel en masse, foreshadowing what was to come in 2023.
وسنقتلع قلوبهم رعبا وهلعا وسنعود إلى أرضنا.
During that time, Hamas also came up with new ways to terrorize Israel. They tied explosives to balloons and kites to float into Israel, scorching and destroying thousands of acres of land across southern Israel. These violent riots and arson attacks lasted almost 2 years, peaking in May 2019, when the U.S. moved its embassy to Jerusalem. The next major escalation came in May 2021, when Hamas launched barrages of rockets towards Jerusalem, sparking Operation Guardian of the Walls. Hamas and Islamic Jihad fired nearly as many rockets at Israel in just 12 days as they had over the span of 2 months in 2014. 2 years later, Hamas carried out the attack that would become the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. On October 7, 2023, thousands of Hamas terrorists broke through the border and invaded Israel, massacring over 1,200 Israelis, most of them civilians, while simultaneously firing thousands of rockets all across Israel. Hamas took hostage about 240 children, women, men, elderly civilians, and foreign nationals.
ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثاني وثالث ورابعة لأنه إحنا لدينا إصرار ولدينا قرار ولدينا إمكانيات.
Since October 7th, Hamas and Israel have been at war, with Hamas hiding behind the civilians of Gaza at every opportunity, including by operating inside hospitals, wearing civilian clothes while actively fighting, and physically preventing Gazan civilians from evacuating war zones. When Hamas launched this war on October 7th, the IDF declared 2 goals: to bring the hostages home and to completely eliminate Hamas.
The problem is they're having to deal with Biden, who has an undeclared war against Israel. You saw those leaders of Hamas, who are protected and funded by Qatar, a terrorist regime, a pretend country led by inbreds who call themselves a monarchy. Al Jazeera is a creation of Qatar. Qatar has poured billions of dollars into our colleges and universities, helping to fund the Hitler Youth in our country, among others. Qatar has bought Republicans and Democrats, special interests, lobbyists on Capitol Hill and in and around Washington, D.C. And then they try and cover all that up by having these international athletic events, whether it's golfing events, tennis events, so forth and so on. And Joe Biden has been working closely with Qatar, among others, against Israel. Qatar, which protects the leadership of Hamas, gives them safe haven in Qatar and helps fund Hamas, along with Iran, along with Turkey, along with Joe Biden, through Iran. And right now, Netanyahu is under attack. Vicious, vile, brutal things said about him, character assassination, because Joe Biden's taken the side of Iran. Of course, when you're as thoroughly anti-Semitic as Joe Biden, a half-century worth, you know how to play your base. That is, liberal Jews, among others. You know how to say the right things and do certain things that gives the patina, the appearance that you're pro-Israel. And by saying it, I'm pro-Israel, I have their back, Israel's safe as long as I'm here. But this war with Hamas would be over. Most of the remaining hostages would be alive and returned. This war has been prolonged not by Netanyahu, but by Biden and Blinken, because Hamas knows no matter how many hostages they torture, rape, and murder, children, women, old men, that Joe Biden has made it clear he is their special pleader. He wants to protect the leadership. He wants a surrender, which he calls a ceasefire, for his own politics, and he hopes his own election, so he can wave around a document saying peace in our time. Early on in that clip you saw, it was quick, part of the mission statement of Hamas, never peace. A friend of mine Harold Rhodes has spent decades studying the Muslim faith, Iran, and so forth, both in and out of government. And he said, the West does not understand how Islamists think. Islamists sign papers, and they believe you sign those papers to achieve an ends. And they're never going to support peace. They're terrorists. They're never going to support two-state solution, any state solution. Their mission, like the Marxists with respect to communism, is to advance and implant and enshrine an Islamist, fundamentalist Muslim ideology on the entire world. And if you're a Muslim who doesn't agree, or if you're a Muslim of a different sect within Islam, you get to go too. In other words, they're killing you too, as we've seen all throughout the Middle East.
For more, sign up for LEVIN TV.